Verse 19. Om Brahma Siddhivaya Bhutavitapaliyate Rakshya Shapanta Bhavati Ahataname. Again and again, that the day comes, and this host of beings is active, and again the night falls, so far they are helplessly resolved. Parastisnatu Namo Yoga Pasana. Yes, yet there is another nature which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and manifested actor. It is supreme and is never eliminated. And all in this world is annihilated, that part of it is as it is. Text 21. Avyaktam Shala Vidyas That's the real world is called unmanifested and infallible. It is this unique destination. And one goes there, he never comes back. That is minus the world. Verse 22. Yusha Sampara Parha Pokyama Yasmanandayana Yasyantas Mani Bhutani Vena Samani Kampatam. The Supreme Personality of God, who is greater than all, is attainable by unbounded devotion. All that He is present in His abode, He is all pervading, and everything is situated in Him. Verse 23. Yatrikali Pranamritim Agritim Chayayogana Vayakalam Vipankalam Vakshami Vavatarshava. O best of the Bhartas, I shall now explain to you the different times at which passing away from this world, one does not come back. Verse 24. Avyajyotira Hasukla Shamma Sadhukalayam Panchakaya Bhavasunti Brahma Vidojana. Those who are the Supreme Brahman pass away from the world during the influence of the fire of God in their life at an auspicious moment, during the fortnight and the moon of the 6 months when the sun shines in the north. Text 25. Om Krishna Sharma Sada Shinara Pachachandram Vasam Jyoti The mystic who passes away from this world during the smoke, the night, the moonless fortnight, or in the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, or who reaches the moon planet, again comes back. Next 26. Shukla Krishna Vipri Vijudha Shastra Vipri Ekayaya Sanavutim Anyayava Vipri. According to the Vedas, there are 2 ways of passing from this world, one in light and one in darkness. And one passes in light, he does not come back. But when one passes in darkness, he returns. Verse 27. Naite Prithvi Parvajana Yogi Munati Kashchana Esnaksa Devshu Kalishu Yogi Murtavarjana. The devotees who know these 2 paths of ocean and never be broken, and can be always fixed in devotion. 28. Medeshu Geshu Prastu Chayana Nameshu Dakam Palam Pradishtam Ante Tatsa Vindat Vidipadu Palam Sam Paritichanam. A person who accepts the path of devotional service does not forget of the results prior to studying the Vedas, performing austere sacrifices, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and creative activities. At the end, he reaches the supreme goal. Chapter 9, Most Confidential Knowledge, Text 1. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Idam Pute Yantamam Bhavakshyami Nasuyave Jnana Jnana Sapitam Yashyata Moksha Shikha. The Supreme Lord said, my dear Arjuna, because you are ever envious of me, I shall impart to you this most secret wisdom, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. So we go back to text 19, and we text 19 and 20, we do it, and it's the one who is the secret. We don't respond to the heart, we have the heart key. Again and again, the day comes, and this host of beings is active, and again the night falls with power. They are helplessly dissolved. Text 20. If there is another nature which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested in unmanifest matter, it is supreme and is never annihilated. And all of this world is annihilated, that part of it is as it is purple. Krishna's superior series of energy is transcendental and eternal. It is beyond all the changes of material nature, which is manifest and annihilated during the day and the nights of the month. Krishna's superior energy is completely opposite in quality to material nature. Superior and inferior nature are explained in this second chapter. So this is chapter. This is the seventh chapter. Wow. And this is how we read it. So let's see. Asking about chapter 3. I found something interesting in chapter 7, text 1, where it's described by the acharyas in the middle 6th chapter of the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna begins explaining Bhakti Yoga. In the beginning of that chapter 7, Krishna says, now here, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, by practicing yoga and full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can look in full, truth and doubt. So, the first chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is basically giving knowledge that you're beyond the body, you're a spirit soul, that you control your mind and your senses. In this way, he's giving different yoga processes to elevate his consciousness. It's his own position, things three and one. And then at chapter 6, Krishna is speaking about the process of Jnana Yoga, which is setting erect, controlling the mind, meditating, standing in particular thoughts, which Arjuna rejects. It says, famous line, it seems more difficult to control the wind, the mind, and the wind. So, at the end of that, Krishna assures Arjuna to be a yogi. He says, the best of all yogis is one who always worships me. He says, Yogi Nam Pisarvesham, Yoginam Atmanam, Shradhanam Vajradevam, Sami Yukino. And of all yogis, you will always abide in worshiping me in transcendental love and service. Is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. So then one could question, why Krishna? Why is that the best of yogis when you're speaking of Krishna? So then, chapter 7, we just read is, and by practicing yoga and full conscious of him, you can know him in full. And then later in chapter 7, he describes that earth, water, fire, air, ego, learning, intelligence, and false ego, all together, these 8 compromise and separate material energies. To follow up the report is mentioned now, as we mentioned in chapter 7. So Krishna is establishing himself as the source of everything, creator, maintainer of everything. He describes that he's also aloof, beyond everything, which is very bewildering to the Christian soul. How can somebody be the creator and at the same time detached? But this is Krishna. I remember when I was first reading the Bhagavad Gita, really meditating and chanting and trying to connect to Krishna. This fact, bewildered me so much because Imagine you work so hard to create something, whether it's a piece of art, or you work hard in a relationship, or you're working hard to get money, to buy or something, you arrange your room in a certain way. You become so attached to it, so attached. But Krishna creates this whole world, so everything we're living attached to is just a small little particle within this world. But Krishna creates the whole world. He's unattached to it altogether. Completely beyond it. So then Krishna's giving us the knowledge so we can act in the same way. It says somewhere in the Bhagavad Gita. When one understands how Krishna acts in this way, and he's the creator, but being unattached to the results, and also we can work, take that same nature, being unattached to the results, the simple reaction of this world. So, chapter 7, as we heard Krishna explain that he's the material and spiritual energies, he gives some examples. And at the end of chapter 7, he mentioned something significant. So it says, Sarvabhutali Dharvam Samyajnam Chade Guru Prayana Kali Chavam Tevaru Pachayasa. Those who know me as the Supreme Lord, as the governing principle of the material manifestation, who know me as the one underlying all the demigods, as the one sustaining all sacrifices, can with steadfast mind wish the end of knowing even at the time of death. So this part is significant. He says one can understand him even at the time of death. What would we be thinking about? It's easy to think, okay, as a devotee, Krishna's there, I'll be thinking of Krishna. But you can just look at people who, first of all, don't have any knowledge of Krishna, and how bewildering death is. To be on the deathbed, sick, fearful, afraid to let go. Prabhupada gives the example where there was a sick man who was dead, and the doctor was coming to treat him, and he was telling the doctor, I just have 4 more years to execute all my plans, and then I'll be ready. There's 4 more years, and I'll do whatever it takes. Prabhupada was making the point that this is not how it works. You can't buy more money. When it's our time to go, it's our time to go. So, as a devotee, we can hear the importance of remembering Krishna at the time of death. It's still not so simple. We have to practice it. Beginning of chapter 8, Krishna speaks this part. This part in a second. So, the beginning of chapter 8, Arjuna, he asks many questions about what is Brahman, what is the self, what is activities, what is material manifestation, what are the demigods. He asks about the Supreme Lord of Sacrifice, and Paramatma. He asks all these questions because at the end of the last chapter, Krishna mentioned all these words, and Arjuna's inquiring for Krishna to elaborate on it. Which Krishna responds in text 3 and 4, and then from text 5 to the end of this chapter, chapter 8, is all about remembering Krishna at death, or where you go at the time of death. Because he mentioned that one can remember him at the time of death. Arjuna asked about it. So pretty much the majority of this chapter, Krishna is elaborating on that point. Which famous verse? 2 verses, chapter 8, 6, 5.
Antakale chamam eva smaran muktva kalevaram ya prayati samadbhavam yati nasti atra samshayaha. And whoever at the time of death quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. And yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajyati ante kalevaram tam tam evaiti kanteya satatad bhava bhavita. whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. So there it is, Krishna's showing how we carry our consciousness into the next body. We have a particular consciousness, we have motives, desires, we have feelings and different samskaras or impressions that we've had in connection with the material world. And at the time of death, all of that's culminating and building up. And usually that provokes a certain thought or consciousness. Provokes a certain consciousness that will carry into another body. Krishna, he says that our subtle body is carrying ourself into another gross body, just as the wind carries aroma. So you walk outside and sometimes you catch a smell of a certain aroma, sometimes good or bad. I wish it was more good than bad, but what to do? It's material world. Just as that wind is moving this aroma, which you can't really see, but you can perceive it through this sense of smell, which is pretty subtle. Similarly, the subtle body, which you can't see, is moving us into another gross body. So this is the importance where after those two verses, Krishna says, therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. And in the next verse, he who meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Arjuna, is sure to reach me. So Krishna there just gives the recipe for us to be able to remember him at the time of death. We have to always think of him in the form of Krishna and at the same time carry out our prescribed duties. So it's not that we run away from our duties and say, renounce the world, but we perform our duties and always thinking of Krishna. And there's a great analogy given in this introduction of the Bhagavad Gita by Srila Prabhupada. I forget who it originally comes from, one of the 6 Goswamis, but there's a housewife at home and she's having an affair with a lover. And when she's at home, she's thinking of her lover, but she doesn't want to be noticed that she's cheating. So she's doing her duties and she's doing her duties extra well, so nobody will question her or think of anything. But really her mind's thinking of when she'll be able to connect with her paramour. So similarly here, the devotee is shifting his mind to Krishna, focusing on that spiritual world, spiritual life, that eternal abode. But still we have to do our duties. But we don't neglect them. We do them extra well to make sure there's no mistakes so we can get to where we actually want to go. But by following the consciousness that Krishna's providing through these teachings, one will essentially enter into that spiritual domain whilst being here and doing their prescribed duties. Krishna says, Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sugunan samatitaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. When one engages in full devotional service, full-fledged, then one at once comes over the modes of material nature. Which is interesting because in chapter 7, Krishna, he described how he's the source of all the material and spiritual energies. He says everything rests on him, just like pearls are strung on a thread. And then he talks about the modes of material nature, how he gives examples of, he gives that verse where he says, I'm the source of all material and spiritual energies, which consist of earth, water, air, fire, ether, the material energies. So then he gives examples that I am the taste of water, I am the strength of the strong, these like specific examples that he's the essence. So he's in essence, Krishna saying that I am the source of water, I'm also the taste of water. So whatever you can see and perceive and experience, the essence, the root of it is coming from Krishna. But this material nature is ultimately being driven by the modes of material nature. So then he described how he's the source of those modes. And then he says, Daivihe Shagunamayim Mama Maya Dratya Mam Evaye Praparyante Tamstichik Shastra Bharata. I don't know. No, that's not right. Mayame Tam Tarantite. He says, these three modes of material nature are very difficult to cross, but one who surrenders unto me accordingly, which provokes him to describe the people who don't want to surrender to him, and then he describes the pious people who do surrender to him. So that was chapter 7, which is leading to chapter 8, which now Krishna is describing those people who are ready to surrender and how they're actually approaching him, where at first he's describing this, one who remembers me, who works for me, he'll come to me. And why would one want to do that? Well, then he described in the verses that we read, starting, we read text 19, but starting with text 17, or 16 actually. He describes how when one comes to Krishna, they don't come back to this world. They go to the spiritual world, which is eternal. But then the next few verses, 16 to like 20, he describes that wherever you go in this material world, it's ultimately temporary and you have to fall back down. So he's giving valid reason of why somebody would want to remember him at the time of death. Because whatever you do here, ultimately you'll be subject to birth and death, birth and death, birth and death, and ups and downs, ups and downs. But if one could transcend that, then they don't have to come back down again and deal with that. So then, he describes the spiritual world. And then he describes how people leave this world. Some people leave in the bright day, the summertime, when the sun is in a certain position. Or some leave in the nighttime when there's smoke, the dark cycle of the moon. This is basically the paths of jnanis and yogis who are transcending and leaving their body and going to a spiritual platform, leaving in the bright sunlight and daytime and the auspicious signs, or somebody who's bound to karma and coming back down to the material world, who's staying here, or who's leaving at more inauspicious times. But Krishna says, the devotees who know these two paths, O Arjuna, are never bewildered. Therefore, be always fixed in devotion. So when Krishna speaks this particular section of the Bhagavad Gita, showcasing how these jnanis and yogis and karmis leave the world in different situations and their destination, this doesn't apply to the devotees, because the devotees are taking the devotional service, and the word that's used in this chapter, which will be used more in the coming chapters, ananyaya, which means unalloyed. To mean unalloyed, pure devotional service. One depends upon Krishna, so then Krishna takes over one's karma, takes over one's action and reactions. Instead of karma dictating your life, Krishna's there, picking and twisting your karma, purifying you and taking care of you. But to one who constantly depends upon Krishna, like we heard, then they go to Krishna's planet, they go to the spiritual world, and then they'll never come back to take birth in the material world. And also significant to end the chapter, this verse, text 28, a person who accepts the path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing austere sacrifices, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. At the end, he reaches the supreme abode. This shloka is very significant because these other paths of yoga and jnana and karma, it depends upon all these things of studying the Vedas, performing these austere sacrifices, giving charity. But just by taking devotional service, one will naturally get the results of all these things. We don't have to separately endeavor. Just by simply chanting Hare Krishna, remembering Krishna, worshiping Krishna, serving Krishna, we'll come to the ultimate goal, which is to come to Krishna in a life free of misery, filled with bliss for eternity. So all we have to do is just keep doing what we're doing. Sometimes we get frustrated because we're doing things and it's so hard to control the mind, so austere to accept a new lifestyle. But it's all for our benefit. Krishna is really helping us purify ourselves to become situated in this Bhakti Yoga, which is the topmost yoga. And it's very easy to attain in this age of Kali. We just simply have to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'll go back and read some purports unless anybody has any comments or questions or points of discussion. Yes, Bhakta Aiden, Prabhu.
If I start on the devotional path and like deviate or something, I don't know, something happens, just do I just get another chance, or is it like because I already started, my destination is still Krishna? Like, let's say theoretically, like if I were to do this and then like leave and then never think about Krishna again, would I have another birth and then pick up where I left off, or would I still be taken with Krishna because of the service and the study? Kind of just a question.
Well, earlier in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna brings this doubt to Krishna. Because Krishna is speaking about this path of becoming a yogi, being detached from the world. And Arjuna says, what about the person who takes to it, but who's not able to achieve that supreme goal? Then I'm just like this weird bald-headed monk. I wear all these orange clothes. I don't have any of my normal friends or family. Arjuna didn't say that, but I'm just saying in our position, they say, oh, I tried, but I don't have a taste for it. It's not for me. I'd rather go back to doing what I was doing before. So Krishna responds and says that whatever you do is for your eternal benefit. So whatever you do for Krishna will not be lost. Krishna, in one of these chapters, 7 or 8, I forget, 7, Krishna says that he knows past, present, future. He knows everything that's happened. So he knows you better than you know yourself. You ever sometimes have like a deep feeling that stirs you in some way, but you can't put your finger on why you feel that way? Krishna doesn't have that problem. He knows exactly what's going on with you more than you know. So as we take to the path of devotional service, he's revealing more and more of how we can let go of all of our problems. But whatever we do, he won't forget because he always remembers. So it's said that one falls away, then one will take up the path and they'll pick up where they left off, which is nice because it's reassuring that, okay, even if I slip up or I want to go back to enjoy the material world, Krishna will still be there waiting for me. But one has to understand. You can imagine all the struggling and suffering that one's been through in this life that brought us to want to take shelter of Krishna. All the anxiety, depression, fearful moments, chaos, addiction. Is that fun? Because if we are gonna pick up where we left off, we're still stuck in the middle of that, so we're gonna have to deal with all this again. We can't just hide from our problems or run away. And that's exactly what the sense gratification is. We're trying to fill this void. I don't want to face my problems. I don't want to face my boredom. I don't want to face this. So let me do this activity, or let me smoke this thing, drink this thing to help me forget, help me cope with it. So if we fall away, all these things will be right there. So the best course of action is that if we can rid ourselves from these tendencies altogether right now. Otherwise, it's only going to be harmful for us, to take us away from bliss, satisfaction, peacefulness. It's like a rash. And if I have a rash on my arm, like a pretty gnarly rash, I'm like scratching it. It gives me some relief. But then what happens? It becomes more itchy, and like I want to keep scratching it. And you scratch it, maybe not as a human, because humans aren't so unintelligent, but dogs, you can see, especially in India, that live on the street, they have these nasty rashes, and they're always biting at it and always trying to scratch it, and it's raw, bleeding, no fur, and it's like an open wound, but it still itches, and they want to scratch it. So material sense gratification is considered to be just like this rash. The more that we scratch it and indulge in it, the more that it grows in strength. So I think right now I'm feeling stressful. I'm feeling, who am I? What am I doing? This is so difficult. So I want to go do some of the things that we used to do to self-esteem. But all this will do is just add fuel to the fire that we're trying to put out. On the contrary, it's said that, igniting our bhakti yoga, it's like, lighting a fire. And when we enjoy the material world, or we're doing something contrary to the principles of bhakti yoga, it's like trying to start this fire, but putting water on the wood, at the other end of it. So like, okay, I'm waking up and I'm chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So I'm like lighting this wood on one side of the fire. But then, in my free time, I'm like smoking marijuana or watching movies or something. So then on the other side of the fire, I'm pouring water on it. How can we expect to get anywhere? So in short, whatever you do, Krishna will remember, and it will be for your best benefit. But one has to sufficiently understand the difference of pleasing Krishna's senses and serving Krishna's senses versus trying to serve and please our own senses. Because one is the source of joy and happiness and fulfillment, and one is the source of suffering and anxiety. Is that helpful? Is there any other points or comments or questions, doubts?
Just a really quick one. So if I stick to this path and four regular principles and chanting, and hearing and some of the other things, is it guaranteed that I make it back, or is there like a chance to like stick it out and I have to come back anyway, or is it guaranteed? Is it sure?
Prabhupada said, if you follow these four regular principles, you chant Hare Krishna 16 rounds, then you'll go back. But one has to do this diligently and free of offenses. So Krishna describes that devotees who come back, who don't quite make it, They'll come back in a family of devotees who are wealthy, who are pious, and there'll be a favorable situation for them to take up the path again. But there's a famous pastime in the Srimad Bhagavatam about Bharat Maharaj and a deer. You've heard of it? So in the Vedic culture, these kings, they be kings of not just, Kansas City, but like a big kingdom, bigger, more opulent. And they would rule everything, but as soon as they would get this, feeling, not feeling, but point is, they wouldn't hold on to their posts forever. They'd come to a conclusion, okay, now I'm everything's situated and I still have enough strength and age to go engage in spirituality. So they'd renounce their kingdom and take up the life of a sadhu. As opposed to now, I don't know how familiar everybody is with the news, but there's a certain president in a certain country who's very old, and every time he gives a speech or has interaction, it's pretty evident that he's not fit for the post he's occupying, because he's just, no offense, he's just really old. And once you're old, usually your senses and intelligence start to dwindle. So these kings of the Vedic culture would be aware of this, and they would retire to focus on what really matters in life, engaging fully in spirituality. Similarly, Prabhupada, when he came here, one time he saw a big golf course when he was walking with the devotees, and he was asking what it was. And they told him that people work their whole lives and they retire so they could go play around the golf every day. And Prabhupada started crying, and tears came to his eyes, because he was so sad that people are wasting their life, that in their most crucial years of their life, when their death is imminent, it's close, like it's coming, and you've worked your whole life so you don't have so many attachments, you should be in a nice position, then they're just hitting a ball around a field trying to get in a little hole for pleasure. Anyways, these kings would renounce the world. Jada Bharat, he renounced the world, and he was living, doing his bhajan, his worship of the Supreme Lord, and he was fixed in a very, very high state of devotional service. But one day, while he was doing his bhajan, he was by the river, and there was a deer. You've seen a deer before? Yeah, they kind of move all like methodically and slow, and they're like looking around, The deer comes to the water and start sipping water. They put their head down like, they're afraid, because this is the law of nature, that everybody thinks they're going to get eaten by something else. So, the deer is always afraid. It's always an anxiety. Anyways, it goes, and then as soon as it puts its head down, a tiger comes and attacks it. So that the deer leaped across the river, but the deer was pregnant. And the deer had a miscarriage, so the baby, the doe, fell out of the deer, and it was sitting there in the water, like floating down the river. So Jada Bharat took this baby deer and nursed it and took care of it and brought it up to be, like a kid deer and so on. But they became very close, and this deer would follow Jada Bharat everywhere. And he'd be doing his meditation, his worship, and the deer would, come up and start nudging him and hitting him and wanting to play with him. So, he's like, okay, it's a cute deer. So he would give into it. Anyways, one day he was walking and the deer went missing, and he was distraught, and he was looking everywhere for the deer. And then when he was looking for the deer, calling out for the deer, he went and he slipped in the river, and he fell and he died. Here we don't have so many like rivers, but in India, there's rivers coming from the Himalayas. They're like super strong. If you fall into it, you're gone. Anyway, so he died. And when he died, what was he thinking of? He's thinking of the deer. So in his next birth, he came back as a deer. He was in a high state of devotional service, and he thought of a deer and came back as a deer. But Krishna blessed him that when he was in this body of a deer, he was aware of everything that happened, which usually Krishna allows us to forget. Because imagine if you remembered every single thing in your past life, like you remember, this life now, we couldn't live this present life. We'd be so caught up with the past. So Krishna allows us to forget so we can act in this life. Anyways, he came back as a deer. He was aware of what happened, and he said, okay, I'm not messing around. And he just hung around the yogis, the devotees, and he would try to take their prasadam and just hang around them. And then he eventually died, and he came back in the body of Jada Bharat. He's born in a Brahmana family. So he was born in a family that was very pious and very conducive for his spiritual advancement. But he said, I ain't dealing with that. So his father was trying to teach him all like Brahminical qualities and higher standards of life, and he just acted retarded. He acted like he couldn't speak. They're teaching him, okay, you should eat with your right hand and do this, and he would do the backwards. He would do the opposite, just acting like he couldn't understand, so that everybody would just leave him alone and he could just focus on Krishna and be done. So that pastime really highlights this whole chapter of what Krishna is speaking about, what you're focusing on at the time of death. Then Jada Bharat, there's more to it, but that part of the story highlights what Krishna is speaking about. I could just finish the whole story, but yeah.
Hare Krishna. So King Bharat was very advanced in his devotional service. I'm not sure if it specifies in the Bhagavatam where he's situated.
It does. I believe it was Bhav.
Really? Okay.
It's like a high state.
So,
because the example's given that even from like a higher state, one could fall down.
well, what I'm curious about is we hear about mode of goodness acting as like a safety net. One falls from the transcendental platform near gun into sattva gun, like someone who falls off a tightrope into a net. It catches them. But I was listening to a lecture from Danavir Maharaj today. He was speaking on Bhagavad Gita chapter 8, and he was talking about how we wind up with the bodies that we do, or the bodies that we have. And typically, if one has a human body, it's because in their last life they came to the mode of passion, and passion kind of brings one to the human platform, where mode of goodness brings one higher, and mode of ignorance, you usually wind up as like a tree, an insect, or a deer, some animal. So my question is surrounding how King Bharat fell so low at the time of death, even though he was transcendentally situated. It appears that he was in the mode of ignorance at that very last moment, lamenting about, the deer, or
He became attached to the deer. This is what happens when we become attached. But Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita how the modes of material nature are always fighting for supremacy. So one time one is more dominant, another is more dominant. It's never steady. And the good examples, we could see this throughout the daytime. That obviously there's a different energy, a different flow of energy at different times of the day. So these modes are always fighting for supremacy within ourselves, within everything. And generally speaking, yes, in terms of consciousness leading to our next body and taking a certain form, but there's specific causes. Yeah, Maharaj would like to say something? Great.
So, should I speak or should I? I'll try to. Hopefully you'll be able to understand. If not, you can repeat it. Normally, if someone becomes a deer, it's more of ignorance. But in this case, it was special because he remembered previously his life. So it was a special benediction from him. That was his correction. But at the same time, getting mercy of the Lord. Read it?
So Maharaj was saying that when people are born a deer, they die in the mode of ignorance. But this case was a special case because King Bharat was
Because the Lord gave him a benediction, become a deer, but at the same time, he remembers his previous life.
So the Lord gave him a benediction, King Bharat, that he would become a deer, but he would remember his past life.
That way, after 3 births, he was back liberated, spiritual world.
And that way, after 3 births, he was back liberated in the spiritual world. Thank you.
Yeah, so we hear this in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Ultimately, it's all a lila. It's there for us to see the example because these aren't ordinary personalities. But we could see what happens if I'm too attached to my pet cat or pet dog and I take birth as a dog, you could pretty much guarantee that I'm not going to remember that, I was on this path of worship. So in that sense, Jatabar was a very special case. But it's something to always be mindful of. How we can practice to be in Sattva Gun or in Transcendental and do our worship at any time. We can get caught up in the modes of material nature and be lost in that. And it's very, very easy.
The thought just came to me. Do you reckon that King Bharat had fallen from that transcendental platform before his death? Like he was already kind of flirting with the modes of material nature as he, kind of sacrificed his worship in favor of the deer. Do you think he was already kind of headed that direction?
I mean, the way it's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam is like I said, how he is doing his worship, he's doing his meditation, and the deer comes nudging in, playing, sitting on his lap. And like, you gotta think when you're doing worship and sacrifices, you just have to be like super clean, you have to be pure. Hey, we can hear Maharaj, you don't need to say everything twice. No, it's okay. I was trying to communicate.
I can speak? I asked him to speak. I asked him to repeat it because I knew my voice wasn't coming out very good. Anyway, he did a good job. But anyway, Prabhupada was commenting about Bharat Maharaj, and he indicated somewhere that his big mistake was he didn't consult with his guru. He was getting attached to his deer, and he was giving up his practice. If he consulted with his spiritual master, he could have been put on the right track. But he didn't. He wandered off, and therefore, got in trouble. Kind of brings it back down to earth for us. If we start getting off track, like we've been talking lately, we check with our spiritual authorities, make sure we're not getting too far off track here. Thank you.
Really? Hare Krishna. Oh, really? We should fix the clock then. Sorry that it's late. But, on this one last point that Maharaj made, that quoting Prabhupada's, it's a very nice point that to have certain sangha, association in our life that we can always reveal our mind to and be open with, because it's very easy to go through phases in devotional service and we accept this certain activity, this certain way of doing. In the arti, I'm going to act like this or dance like this. When I read, I'm going to do this. When I chant, I'm going to, all these different things that we're trying to do that's going to help us advance. But if we're not being open and transparent, then very easily we can develop bad habits that actually start taking us on a little bit of a deviant path. So the more that we can confer with guru, with sadhus who are practicing, then it's in our best interest. So humility, to lay ourselves before somebody and say, I'm trying like this, I'm doing this, but it's not working, or I'm doing this, is this the greatest thing? And then they can give their advice. Okay, sorry for the mishap with the time, I guess. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Shri Gaur Nektai ki jai. Manchakapatu Bhyascha Kripa Sindhi Vacha Patitanam Bhavanibhi Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah.